Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How about you?
Very well, thank you. In the midst of a
I don't usually
thunderstorm.
ask you that. I don't usually ask you how you're doing. I should. Yes. This is a nonsense or not day.
Nonsense or not, yes.
Famous library. I don't
Yes, lovely library. I'd love
I
that in
love
my
this.
house.
I just love this. It's such a dramatic view, and it's so apropos because we're doing nonsense or not,
Yes, we are.
and we're doing nonsense or not on where one of the authors is about as old as this library, isn't he? I mean,
Uh,
no, Kissinger is not. He's only 90.
no, he's past 100, and actually he passed away a few months ago.
You know, I forgot that he did, and he reached 100. I forgot that he reached 100. I
Yes.
last I looked, it was 98. Anyway, you know, Deirdre, I saw a video of him talking about this book after he was part of the author team, and I believe he was, would he have been 98 or 99
And
maybe?
it was published in
Yeah.
2021. So he would
So
have been 98, 99.
yeah, I think he was in that range, 98 at least, just sharp as a tack.
He is one of those people, absolutely sharp till the very end, and certainly this book represents that. Um,
So, nonsense or not, tell us a little bit about the book we're talking about and the authors and
I'll
why
tell you
we're
what,
choosing them.
Tom, let me share my screen
Oh,
because
okay, good.
some of this is in my slides. Here
Okay,
we
here we
go.
go.
Okay, you can see my slides now?
I can, yes, they look great.
Okay, nonsense or not? So, what is nonsense or not? This is the question you just asked. This is part of our whole Deep Business initiative where we focus on leadership and strategy. And we look at business literature, classics, new books, journals, articles, books, often expansion of articles. And we ask, does the book or article or information provide useful input for leaders in terms of making decisions and creating strategies? That's our focus here. How useful is the material to the leaders? And we're dealing with the issues you and I keep seeing in business literature that far too often you and I discuss, even in renowned journals to this day. The focus is on corporations in the industrial age, very little coverage of businesses in the digital age, and therefore a lack of support of leaders today making decisions and creating strategies, especially around the emerging technologies. And there's a lack of a broader context of what's going on in this digital age and in the business ecosystems. So the focus today is the book, The Age of AI and Our Human Future. Here it is, published in 2021. The overall themes of this book are that AI has the potential to affect and transform every field of human endeavor, often in ways we're not yet thinking about. And we have not yet established a common vocabulary and understanding for thinking through AI's effects. And this book creates that common frame of reference. And because of that, because one of the themes is creating this common vocabulary and frame of reference, I'm going to be using the author's vocabulary and quoting from them a lot more than I normally would in any sort of presentation on a book like this. But I want to establish the trains of thought that they are creating in this book. Now, you know these authors. Henry Kissinger, we were just talking about him. I was trying to be constrained in my use of descriptors of him, but certainly a known person. Eric Schmidt, technologist, entrepreneur, philanthropist. Daniel Huttenlocher, academic and technologist. He was the first dean at the Schwartzberg College of Technology at MIT, Cornell, Xerox PARC, a lot of tremendous credentials. And so what these people are, keep their credentials in mind when you think about the focus of this book. They're focusing on the larger sphere. They're not talking about the technology itself. They're talking about how the technology is used or the impact of technology in society and certainly in the political sphere. And given that scope, certainly they have the credentials to do so.
You know, one of the interesting things about the three authors, Deirdre, is if I could get you to go back for one slide just for a second, down at the bottom. You know, the perspective is that Kissinger brings a global mindset to the discussion. He thinks about, he was national security advisor to the president at one point when he was in government service. He thinks about it from a foreign policy point of view.
Correct.
Schmidt himself did his doctoral dissertation in technology, so he has a deep research background originally in technology to begin with, and then he joined, as we all know, Google and built that into the mega company that we see today.
Right.
And he was the person brought in to build it.
Yes.
By the two founders. And then, you know, Huttenlocher, he's an interesting individual who is mostly an academic. So you've got three different and divergent views of this thing. And then obviously Huttenlocher lives it every day because he's the dean of the School of, I think it, so what is this official title at MIT?
He's the inaugural dean of the MIT Schwarzman College.
Schwarzman College. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's an interesting group.
Yes.
And they're different generations because Schmidt is in his 60s, I believe, would be my guess. And, you know, you've got Kissinger, who is where he was then. And Huttenlocher is younger than that. He's in his 50s. So it's a different group of people that have seen this in an interesting way.
Yes.
So I think that's helpful to know. Why did they put these three together? I think that's the point. They wanted to have somebody that's involved in it absolutely today. They wanted to have someone who's built a company around these types of things. And then they wanted to have somebody that brought the global perspective and the national geopolitical is probably the better way to say it, the geopolitical aspects. And that comes through in the topics they discuss.
It certainly does. It's the idea of getting people to broaden our thinking around the use of AI and technology. And certainly these people have a lot to say about it. In fact, I'm only going to be able to touch on a few high points of the discussion that they present. And what the book does cover is the nature of AI and what makes it so concerning to people, why people are starting to talk about implications and issues related to it. About 75% of the content of the book is on social and political concerns, especially the political. And we don't hear much about that. That's part of what made this book so interesting to me. And then they have deep discussions of three areas. Remember their credentials when you see these areas: global network platforms, security and world order, and then human identity. So it's a broad range of things. And again, we'll give you a general overview of the sorts of the approaches of their thinking toward these topics. But first, what I want to do, Tom, is jump ahead to our three final questions. At the end of our Nonsense or Nots, you asked me three final questions. And what I want to do is just clear these areas so people can focus on what the authors are really saying. So who would I give this book to and who would I not? Well, frankly, I'd give it to everyone. I think everyone should read this book because it is mind-opening, mind-broadening. And anyone who is involved in any use of technology should start to think about the whole range of topics. So it is definitely not nonsense. It's very much something that it's the type of commentary that we all should pay attention to. So with that, let's get going. First thing to point out here And this is something you and I talk about a lot, Tom, is the quotation marks around AI. That you and I have commented about the imprecision of the term, that in the business literature, people use the term AI to describe anything from basic automation through robotics, through analytics, through machine learning to whatever they're talking about. And this is one of the things that makes the literature so imprecise and frankly not useful to leaders, because you can't have the same thinking, the same strategic thinking, the same judgment around, say, basic automation as you would around machine learning or generative AI. So you and I like to try to drill down to the exact form of AI we're talking about here. Fortunately, these authors do get more precise. So when they're talking about AI in this book, they're really focusing on the machine learning, the generative AI, in effect, algorithms that learn and algorithms that create their own logic. Because that creates a lot of the issues that the authors talk about. And what the authors talk about is that this form of AI, and I'm going to start to use their vocabulary and their phrasing, as I said I would do here, is it's certainly not rules-based, but it has a logic of its own informed by the ability to recognize patterns of moves across vast sets of possibilities. They describe it as complex and inconsistent, imprecise, dynamic, emergent, and capable of, and their quotation marks, learning according to their own logic. And the result of this, they learn by consuming data and then draw their own observation and conclusions based on their data. And while the authors don't make it explicit, obviously the quality of the learning is based on the quality of the data sets used to train the algorithms. The authors do point out that this is a major difference in that previous systems required exact inputs and outputs, while these forms of AI require neither. If you have an imprecise function, you do not require the exact inputs and outputs. So this is a shift from attempting to encode human distilled insights into machines to delegating the learning process itself to the machines. And then the generative AI goes even further, in which the Gen AI can generate possible responses to various inputs by accessing different aspects of reality from the aspects humans access. And what this can do is, yes, it may enrich our info space, but without checks, it will likely also blur the line between reality and fantasy, that the AIs become sorters and shifters of reality and actors on the world stage. That last phrase is very important for these authors. The idea that the AIs themselves and what they enable are themselves actors on the world stage and need to be treated as actors on the stage. And what this does is it comes to two additional themes in the book, that the results you get out of the use of these learning AIs are unknowable. You don't know what's coming out of them. And then this is a big theme going forward, the need for humans and governments to become more aware of the consequences of these characteristics and then act. The humans and governments need to act, in effect, or else. And a lot of the rest of the book talks about the consequences of the freedom of the logic, but from the AIs, and the consequences if humans and governments do not act. So let's look at this. What the authors talk about, and now I'm going back to some of their phrasing again, when machine learning AIs model reality on their own, humans must verify and decide the significance of the results. Now, this is something you and I, Tom, have talked about a lot. A lot of people, or a lot of the uses of ML even basic ML, where people create the algorithms for a situation, let the ML algorithms run, and then people or companies pick up the results of that and then just base judgments and strategies on that, which is a disaster for the companies and the individuals. That what needs to happen is for an analytics team to take the results, which really are just predictions and insights. They're not conclusions, they're not recommendations necessarily, but humans have to step in and take the predictions and the insights and turn that into a strategy that is right for the company. So this is why humans are very important, and the lack of humans there as an intermediary between the results and the actions causes problems. That's something very important to remember. And going back to quoting the authors again, the inability of AI to check errors on its own means using its own means is important to develop testing that allows humans to identify the limits of an AI's capabilities, review its proposed course of action, and identify and then predict what is likely to fail. So humans need to understand what an AI can and cannot do, review the insights and recommendations, and decide what to do. It's implicit in this, then, that government involvement needs to happen along these lines. We need, the authors talk about this frequently, we need human-machine partnerships. We need transparency about the use of AI and its integration into our lives, and that we need to think through who, frankly, is doing this work. This is another of the big themes of these authors. That, quoting the authors again, the most advanced AIs require vast data, tremendous computing power, and skilled technicians. Organizations with access to such resources drive much of the innovation in the field right now. And of course, right now, this is tech companies. And what the authors say, one of the main things that they will repeat over and over is the need to broaden advanced computing capabilities beyond tech companies. This leads into the latest issue of the MIT Tech Review. This is their June issue, carried an editorial by Eric Schmidt, which the theme of it was why America needs an Apollo program for the age of AI. Now, you and I, Tom, remember the Apollo program. For those of us who don't date back to the 1960s, the Apollo program was the program to put people on the moon. And it was all of the advances by NASA and space exploration throughout the 60s that got us back onto the moon. So what Eric Schmidt is proposing is the same sort of program, because it's becoming important to recognize these AIs as players on the global stage. As he puts it in the editorial, there's a global race for computational power and need for more computing horsepower to train and use AI models because they're becoming a source of geopolitical leverage and will also shape the way nations will grow and compete in the future. These are themes of the book. And we see it playing out today. We see the business press, the Wall Street Journal, the technology press, talking about China and the United States as geopolitical players in relation to the AI computational race. And what Schmidt is saying is, therefore, there's a need for a national computational strategy, an Apollo program for the age of AI, which would expand the government. He's talking about the US government here, access to computing power and to deploy AI in the nation's service. And he talks about three aspects for this. and that's the need for more dedicated governmental AI supercomputers, need for a hybrid model of the use of commercial cloud platforms, that's the tech companies, and high performance federal computing infrastructure. He's talking infrastructure here. The need to create a US infrastructure for computing around AI to give access to researchers, universities, and researchers to this high-level infrastructure so we can promote the use of research into AI beyond simply what the tech companies are doing. And he's talking about the need, along with this, a talent strategy to build a computer and AI workforce, which likely involves recruiting and training students who want to pursue AI, and likely global students. Just because of the sheer numbers, we need a massive workforce here. So we will need to have not only US students, but also recruit the global tech students to work on the US-based infrastructure for AI. A massive program, but they're putting it out there. They're being the authors for this book in talking about these themes in this book, and Eric Schmidt talking about it in his editorial in one of the prime journals of technology, the MIT Tech Review. So let's start to talk a little bit more about this now. Let's talk about the global network partners. They define in the book, they being, whenever I use they, I'm talking about the authors of the book. They define these platforms as digital services that provide value to users, a very bland definition. Let's talk about the players here. We know who these are. These are Amazon, Facebook, the various other social media players, and think about their effects on culture. But even beyond that, you've got the large technology companies, people like Google and Microsoft and Apple. And if you need an example of how this operates, we only need to look a few days ago, Tom, isn't that right? At the whole crowdsource failure with Microsoft to start to get a sense of the impact that all of these global network platforms have, not only on business, but also culture and the ability for us living on our digital platform today. And then let's throw in on top of that some global players, some of the global communication platforms like the BBC, which operates all over the place, Al Jazeera, which operates throughout its parts of the world, AP. And then it's almost like the lightning rod in this, TikTok, which people are saying in the United States, at least, and parts of Europe, they're talking about banning TikTok because they are aware of the possibility of the Chinese government using TikTok to not only gather data on the users around the world, but also use this platform to push propaganda from China to wherever in the world TikTok is operating. I'll mention this going forward again. So what are some of the features and uses of this? And again, because I want to track the authors' desire to develop a framework for discussing this, I'm going to be using the author's phrasing right here. They say that these global platforms have the ability to shape human activity in ways that may not be clearly understood or even definable or expressible to the user. Most people, when they're out on Facebook, don't understand the data collection, the culture that's being pushed, the selection decisions of content and so forth, even while they're just keeping up with their family on a Facebook. And authors, again, the dynamic enabled by access to such personal data puts network platforms, their operators, and the AI they employ in newfound positions of social and political influence. Think about that now. Think about Amazon's influence. Think about Facebook and all of the social media platforms in relation to what the authors just said. Let's keep going with their phrasing. Also see AI is embedded in applications on digital devices and the internet, guiding consumer experiences and revolutionizing enterprises. Some of these may encourage distribution of certain types of information and content and discourage others. Major fights going on right now, Tom, aren't there? On what, for example, some of the platforms out there are pushing in terms of content, in terms of recommendation, in terms of the next thing that people see. And people on both sides of the political spectrum are claiming that one or the other sides are gaining advantages. Meanwhile, the companies in the middle, the Metas, the Facebooks, even the Amazons, certainly now X and so forth, all of the social media platforms are being put in the role of being arbiters of what content gets pushed. This is very, very dangerous, as I think everyone is becoming aware. But people may be aware of the dangers, but they're not backing it out to all of the global network platforms that are driving our life today. Some of the geopolitical factors involved, and I'm back to quoting the authors, these platforms are becoming geopolitically significant actors due to their scale, their function, and their influence. Now, we sitting here in the US may not be aware of how all of these platforms operate globally. That's why I tried to drop in some global names previously, like the BBC and Al Jazeera, because global platforms are coming out of various geopolitical regions and extending their influence all over the place. And the people who are drawing on them are hearing what these platforms want them to hear. For example, and now I'm going on further about what these authors are saying about this, that the governments and network platforms must talk about the goals and parameters of the platforms and the world they aim to create. Now, I'm going to drop in some editorial comments here at that time, and I'm sure you have editorial comments. I think this is a nice goal. I think we need to understand that every single one of these global platforms has its own priorities, its own reasons for existence, and certainly all of the governments have their different points of view in this. Can we even come to a definition between the governments and the network platforms of the world we want to create? I don't think so. Do you want to drop in a thought here, Tom? Or
So there's so much about this, Deirdre. This gets back to, the two fundamental questions that we think have to be untangled in the world today, probably for a very long time, but they become clear to us in dealing with the world today, is what are you missing? And also, how are the motivations focused? And are they aligning or are they opposing?
correct.
And so it's too easy to be able to conclude that we don't know what we're missing in some of these global platforms. Meaning, we don't know exactly how they're using what they're collecting. We do know that in the case of TikTok and others, they're collecting massive amounts of information from the users. And what we're missing is what they're doing with it. And then we're missing how their motivations are focused, where the motivations are. Now, one thing we can be sure of is that there are certain players in the world that are not aligned with the West, with the US and the US allies on motivations. And even within the allies, we have, difficulty making sure we understand all the motivations there and keeping them aligned. And that's another issue. But we can be pretty sure that the motivations are not aligned well with a number of people who are behind some of these platforms.
Correct.
And so the combination of those two things, where you have motivations that are not aligned and that may be actually opposing, and where you have many pieces that are important to you missing, is where you take pause. This is where you take pause and say, what do I do about this? And this is the critical point that we get to in our whole curriculum on judgment.
Yes.
Is it's dealing with these kind of what appear to be almost unsolvable issues. And what you're looking for is not the solution to the issue long term. The issue is, what do I do next?
Yes.
What step do I take next? So I think in most of these, as we've said before, Deirdre, the limiting factor in your analysis of anything is time.
Yes.
Is how much time can you take to be able to fill in what you're missing and to be able to analyze the motivations and decide how you want to deal with those. The problem with this one is judging the amount of time. And so what we always say is that you can pretty clearly know that you're missing major pieces. You can pretty clearly know that motivations are not aligned. The question is, with the pressure of time, what can you reasonably do with what you have?
Right.
And do you have time to fill it in, or do you not? And that's the hard part. We don't know how to judge the time. What these authors do, though, is they do, in a way, indicate that there is urgency in the time. So we are not unlimited on the time factor. In fact, they believe, and I think they use the phrase, it's down here in my notes, that time will continue to compress.
Yes.
And all of us who are technologists or deal in technology, we know this, that technology is accelerating at a faster pace than we're keeping up with it in I don't know what the right phrase is, Deirdre, but being able to make sure that we're sweeping up behind it, right? It's always ahead of us a little bit. And so these questions of what could we be missing and motivations get a little tricky, because that accelerates, which is pushing the time compression point. Now, they weren't talking about time compression in exactly the way that I've just said it, but that's their whole point was, though, that because we're employing this technology to advance various areas of our society more quickly than we've been experiencing, this will compress various aspects of time. And for us as leaders, what that means to us is that time pressure will become greater for us to understand those first two questions. So when I look at this, I take that away. There's another thing, Deirdre, that I think is critical in what they're talking about. And that is, and I know you'll get to this, so I'm not going to go down this path very long, but one of the key questions they're asking is, how will artificial intelligence change human experience going forward? And I know you intend to talk about this subject, so I don't want to bring it up now, other than just to put it on the table to discuss. But that is a key element here. And then, so the first is this point about always, always, it's helpful to start. Anytime you're dealing with something that is difficult, to triage it with those questions, the first two questions of the three, before you get to, all right, what could I do better than I'm doing today? Perhaps there's nothing, right? But what is it? And what kind of risk am I taking? Am I increasing the risk, or am I decreasing it by not acting and by taking a step? So that's my first reaction, but it's also that underlying this is this acceleration of time that's being created and imposed on us because of the employment of this technology in our foundation, right? And I know this, I'm giving you almost a spider web answer here, but we live today on a technology foundation. And your point early on about the issue with the taking down a simple, I shouldn't try to characterize it as simple, but taking our networks down across, and workstations down across many places for long periods of time, that the fix required in many cases human intervention at the workstation level, which is pretty dramatic in a lot of cases. There are people that have really good companies that would help that, and that's one of them is our entrepreneur friend who's part of Deep Business, by the way. But be that as it may, and that's why we are going to get him to describe this issue for us.
Correct.
As an aside, but that's problem one. And then so it's the questions and then the compression of time, and time is the limiting factor in helping you with those questions. Then the second is that the employment of this technology is fundamentally changing this infrastructure we live on that is already fragile. We know that. We experienced it the other day, and is fragile on small things, such as an upgrade that was pushed through to certain workstations. So if you read deeply here, there are implications that jump out at you. Now, I will tell you that I read some book reviews of this, right? And I mentioned this to you, Deirdre, because you tend to read source material, and you're studying the source material for the implications. And I want to see, what do other people take? Because I enjoyed the book a lot. And, I've spent years on this subject, and so have you. I enjoyed it. Many technologists did not, because they thought it didn't deal enough in technology, and that what the world really needs is a survey of all the technology that exists today, especially around the learning algorithm piece. And that would have been a lot better. Now, that's from the tech writer at the New York Times, right? And I'm being very unfair in my characterization of the review. So I apologize in advance if I offended that tech writer. That was not my case, but that's my takeaway. Opinion of one, and I'm sure that's not, I'm taking it somewhat out of context. There were a couple of other reviews that were very good, but they came out of national security. Probably the best one I saw came out of Air University, which, by the way, you and I we have taught for the Air University group before, which is the Air Force's advanced leadership school. And they used to come to Columbia to study with us. And so with us at Columbia, meaning our program at Columbia. And the article was very balanced and came away with some really good questions. And that focused a lot on the kinds of issues we're focusing on. There was one that came out of the Army War College that focused on purely on the global defense side, and was very clear about, look, I'm not going to ignore a lot of this and focus right there. It's very good, by the way. And I'll stop it there. So if you want some kind of insight into what this book is telling you, take a hard look at would not be something you would normally do. This looked like, so it would be a review from Air University, literally airuniversity.org. And then the one from the Army War College, which goes into the more the global political aspect of this. So, my takeaway, Deirdre, is that when you say global, and I know I've given you a 20-minute answer to a simple question and you want to move on, but this concept of global network platforms that have AI built into them in some way, and notice that's your second bullet there, features and use of AI, puts a level of instability that adds to the instability that's already existing on our digital platform that you and I live on and function on and live our lives from the moment, for every minute of every day. Mm-hmm. Now, so when I say instability, one of the points, I wrote down some of the points you made. It's learning algorithms that are not necessarily repeatable results. They don't explain themselves. You used the term that they used, even though it wasn't on your chart, imprecise, but it's clear they're not. And they're not repeatable. Mm-hmm. And they do predictions and insights. So think, and I used the phrase, they're not reconcilable. Yeah. So those of us that come out of the numbers world, and also those of us that come out of a little bit of research, we look for reconciliation and repeatability, because that tells us that we're perhaps onto something. So, for example, the reason Einstein's theory of relativity, much of it continues to live today, is because people keep repeating tests of his algorithms, his equations, and they continue to give the results that are predicted, or they can prove the results that is predicted. That's the issue of repeatability and reconciliation, which by definition is not built into this. So you are adding that element, and that's the point that you're making, and that's the point that is so troublesome, to get back to one of the initial points you make about the use of this technology in applications that are used every day for results that require repeatability and reconciliation. That is where I have big issues. And, I get into arguments with my friends at times, not arguments, it's not the right word, but discussions with friends that they are not thinking this way. Mm-hmm. Now, I wouldn't expect them to, because they have other things they've got to keep in mind, that they don't spend their life thinking about this like you and I do. But our job is to help advise leaders in making decisions and dealing with really hard things. This is troublesome for all the reasons I just said. And you're going to say, can't you say that simpler? I know you, and you're right. I've got to find a way to explain what I've just explained in a much, much simpler way. But instead of continuing to prove myself wrong, which I'm constantly doing, and I know you know this, I keep asking myself, what am I missing about this that is causing me to think about this in this way? All I see is things that help, that support this element of insecurity going forward. Now, there are a lot of other implications to this, but what I would say, and I know I'm being premature here, Deirdre, in this, but I would say this is a book that I think any serious person in the world today would be would be would benefit from reading with an open mind to begin to learn about the aspects of this technology, because this technology is not, and by the way, this technology in its current generation, and one could think about that as second or third generation, meaning learning versus rule-based, right? And we have a definition about the different what's rule-based and what's not rule-based, but this is not rule-based.
No.
In this generation, where you move into learning algorithms, that is how you and I define AI. We're probably being a little bit unfair because perhaps there are aspects, and even our friend and colleague Srinivas, he uses the term artificial intelligence for anything that mimics human behavior and improves it, right? And a little bit of that is Turing, although Turing used to say, you have to prove to me that anybody seeing it couldn't tell the difference between a human doing it and a machine doing it. Okay, maybe the results, but I'm going to stop there. This subject is so complex. Now, fortunately, we have you, who is you think about this thing in a lot cleaner way than I do, obviously. And you're heading up a monthly discussion group around the subject of AI with serious people who know this and have been using this for 20 years in that audience of
Right.
people. This is a subject that is worth an hour a month. If all you do is just attend a discussion of serious people talking about the implications of this. And we're fortunate to have part of our team somebody who spent 20 years in this technology, back through when it was first generation, second generation, and now what one could think of as either second or third generation. All right, Deirdre, I took a half an hour to answer a question you were hoping I was going to answer in a minute, but
Right.
just this is the problem with this subject, right?
But the comment I want to make about that, Tom, is that you, who have had multiple C-suite roles, many multiple C-suite roles, are reacting to this book the way a leader would. That this is why I think both of us recommend all leaders and anyone aspiring to any sort of leadership position or promotion in any sort of entity, read this to understand the implications, because you're following trains of thought about the implications of what you're reading here. And the authors themselves are presenting a lot of information that should lead people to say, wait a second, I heard this, or we're thinking about doing this, but wait a second, do I understand what the implications are? So I think it was very valuable for people to follow your thinking about this subject, the way leaders respond to this. And I'll also mention, in addition to our monthly AI workshop, we have a monthly judgment workshop, a judgment seminar, where we talk through how do leaders make decisions about these difficult topics. And I think our next one on that is about 10 days from now. We'll set up notices about that.
Yeah, and we've now standardized that all of our programs are on a Wednesday evening, starting at 8 p.m. East Coast time on New York time. And so it'll be the last Wednesday of the month of July. And in that symposium, Deirdre, we focus on these kind of issues and say, all right, based on this now, but what we do is we limit the time.
Yes.
We limit the time. So you only have a certain amount of time to be able to think this through. I would just say one final thing, Deirdre. The beauty of what these folks have done is they have made the subject approachable for anyone who can read a book, right? If you can read a book, you can read this.
Okay.
Don't you think? I mean, they've written it in a consumable way.
It's written in a very consumable way. Now, what that means is that they haven't drilled down to a lot of detail, but I think that was a wise editorial decision on their part, because these ideas are so unique certainly to most readers of this book, that they could only handle them at the high level that the authors talk
And I
at.
believe that's the complaint of technologists many times, or tech people, is that. But to me, I saw it differently. I saw that they do a beautiful job of it talking about this at that level, consumable by anybody that can read a business book. And Deirdre,
Absolutely.
you have a copy there, don't you? It's a bit daunting in size.
It's not
Um,
that daunting.
it's not
It,
terrible. No, it isn't. I read it on Kindle, so it's hard to know, but it's not, but it is beautifully written. This is not a hard ask to, at least if you can do nothing else, to uh read a review of it, right? Just so you get a sense of some of the concepts, but or spend the hour talking with us here. But I got to tell you, this is I think, and the reason why we're spending so much time on this book, when it's not obvious why you would ever read this, because you'd look at the authors and say, they don't have anything to tell me, or you could. It's the same reason why we'll come back later and tell you it's worth looking at Larry Bossidy's book on execution, or we'll look at Peter Drucker's book on leadership and management. It's just that some of these people have really serious thoughts and concepts that have lasting value. They may have some contextual issues, and you can put those aside, but the points, the fundamental points they're making are good. This one does an excellent job of laying out the the key issues, I think. I mean, they've made some conclusions that you and I would question whether we agree with that. They're minor. They're really minor. The whole point here is that this is worth everybody's time who's serious about functioning over the next 20 years.
correct. And so with that, let me keep going through the content that they've created. A few more points about the global network platforms. A statement direct from the authors: a government may decide that the risks of allowing certain foreign network platforms to operate within its borders are unacceptable. Well, I'm going to mention TikTok again, but I'm also going to mention in the newspapers yesterday, I believe, there was talk about how the Russian Wikipedia, that's not a translation, it's a completely new Wikipedia created in Russia for Russians, is just being released now. Now, think about what that means in terms of the information being received by the population and the ability of the network platforms to enable that sort of thing. Now, I do want to make a point here, which is, again, something leaders have to think about. These authors were uneasy, and they've seen uneasy throughout the book, about the use and power of these global networks and their AI functionality in the hands of private companies. This is a major policy issue that we're all going to be addressing. We don't have 20 years to address this, Tom. It's going to be addressed in the next 2 or 3 years, I think. But especially without the input of humans and government entities and likely regulators, the stakes are presented as too high without the input of all stakeholders in making good decisions about the use of such platforms and AI. Now, from an organizational point of view, just am trying to figure out how this would work. I think that we're not going to come to any conclusions. I don't see us coming to any conclusions, at least not for the coming years. But I agree very, very strongly that the discussions have to happen, and they have to be informed discussions. I think a lot of the discussions going on right now are not seeing the whole picture, which is part of what these authors are trying to present. I also think that one thing the authors miss is that humans have a lot more power in this than maybe the authors suggest. For example, think of all the products that Amazon and Google have announced, and then a year later they shut off the initiatives because consumers didn't accept them. Or think about, the metaverse, which was so hot 2-3 years ago, and now you don't hear a word about it. Same thing is going on right now with the VR and AR headsets, which have been announced by multiple of the tech companies and don't seem to be getting the marketplace traction that the companies would expect. So maybe the tech companies don't fully have the amount of power that these authors see them having. But even so, having said that, we cannot overlook the power that the companies have in our lives and the need for what I'll call additional input to the use of that power on a global scale. I'm not downplaying the concerns of the authors at all. I'm saying that there's still hope for humans in this picture right now. So anyway, let me go on to the next slide, the security and world order. And the authors bring up 3 areas of concern here. One is cybersecurity and cybercrime. Second is the use of AI in weapon systems. And the third is more geopolitical factors. So they didn't really talk as much as you and I might expect, Tom, on the whole issue of cybersecurity and cybercrime. They really just made the points that AI is making this stuff easier, that there are a lot more cybersecurity issues because of AI, and that AI is driving cybercrime and cyber breaches, making things like broad denial of service easier, making taking over computers easier. And as of this moment, we don't know the role of AI in the crowd spike breach this past weekend, Tom, but I bet there was some sort of AI factor in this. And we'll find out from some of our friends in the industry right now about this. But they're just saying, given the factors of AI, be aware that there could be more cybersecurity and cybercrime and cyber breach issues here. Where they really drilled down into this, and I've got to say that this was an eye-opener for me, was in the use of AI in weapon systems. I think you might be more attuned to this than I, Tom, but even with everything that I know and everything I've been keeping up with in the use of AI, well, I'm just going to use the author's phrasing as I read through some of this. Because AIs are dynamic and emergent, even those powers creating or wielding an AI-designed or AI-operated weapon may not know exactly how powerful it is or exactly what it will do in a given situation. The authors here are referring back to the learning capabilities and the ability of these learning capabilities to drive a logic in the AIs that is different from the logic and intelligence that you and I, Tom, are used to. Going on by some of what the authors are saying, AI and machine learning will change actors' strategic and tactical options by expanding the capabilities of existing classes of weapons. And what immediately came into my mind was drones. You know, before this book was written and published before, say, the war in Ukraine, where there is a massive use of drones on both sides of the war, driven by AI, and we're starting to see how the use of drones are affecting how that whole war is playing out. We're also starting to see drones used by the Houthis in Yemen against Israel. Didn't they make a strike against the Israeli government? Now, the Israelis have just struck back, and I doubt that was by drones. But here you have the use of drones possibly expanding a war in a different area here. This is terrifying stuff, I think, to people. Quoting the authors again, once released, AI-facilitated cyber weapons may be able to adapt and learn well beyond their intended targets. The capabilities of the weapon might change as the AI reacts to its environment. When 2 AI weapon systems are deployed against each other, neither side is likely to have a precise understanding of the results of their interaction will generate or their collateral effects. And where a military uses AI to plan or target, these familiar concepts and interactions may become newly strange because they will involve communication with, an interpretation of, an intelligence that is unfamiliar in its methods and tactics, increasing the inherent risk of preemptive and premature use escalating into conflict. This is downright scary, Tom, that we know that all of the powers that the authors are talking about are getting increased capabilities here. But what we're also seeing is actors all over the world gaining similar capabilities simply because of the use of technology. I would not, before maybe a few months ago, have regarded the Houthis as a power in weaponry, but they're backed by Iran. And we don't know what powers that Iran has in relation to the use of AI in the weapons system. So we have actors that we don't know about using the AI capabilities to use weapons and tactical use of weapons, and we don't know what's going to happen because of this. We don't know how the weapons are going to act. We don't know how the reactions to them are going to react. And we don't know how this affects the planning of the use of these weapon systems. This whole subject is beyond you and me. We can't even discuss it further because we don't have the knowledge here. But it's just a major red flag for leaders to read about and start to internalize in terms of their own non-weapon use of AI in their systems. And we don't know how end users are going to react, or even how their own programs are going to wind up reacting because of the use of AI.
So one of the questions, Deirdre, you could ask yourself, because the skeptics listening to that argument might say, well, I don't even understand how it would be able to get out of control. So let's deconstruct for a second. There are a few issues. There are a few things that come up in how you describe it. You're using their language. Their language is, they call them AIs. The reason why and notice it's a plural. Why do they do that? Because in their mind, an artificial intelligence is an algorithm. It's an equation or set of equations that accomplish something. And so that's why they say AIs, because usually they're constructed to achieve a certain result. Now, what is it? Why do we say these are learning algorithms? And why do we say they're predictive results? Well, that is the whole point. They're predicting something different than a rule-based algorithm would. A rule-based algorithm, simple one, is 2 plus one number plus another equals a number based on the way that we use numbers, right? So that's 2 plus 2 equals 4. We know what it's a rule that we're using, a set of rules that constrict the input and output into that equation. In the world of the way that we think about what may be called second or third generation AI algorithms, is that those algorithms are not heavily rule-based. If anything, they're open to taking input into them and calculating, predicting an outcome, and then optimizing. They're written to optimize based on that input you've given them. Now, when you combine that with something called, and we have a phrase for this called fog of war. Now, what does fog of war mean? It means that the vision of what's happening to you in these environments of conflict where weapons are used is not easily seen. So because you get random information that comes to you for different reasons, but you're feeding all of that now into these learning algorithms. And so how do you take a learning algorithm that you wrote to predict a certain thing? How does it get out of control? Well, it gets out of control because you feed it information to train it that you didn't intend to feed it. And so now it's learning about a subject that you didn't intend it to learn about. And it's mixing it with the subject you did intend it to learn about. And now it's putting both of those together in a way that you would not do because you're separating those in your mind for just for clarity's sake of thought. But it's not thinking that way because it is taking and combining those and optimizing against the different result. And so that's where this stuff gets scary. And that's what Deirdre just described. You combine what's called the fog of war, meaning random information coming off a battlefield or a situation that you don't intend for it to pick up and learn, but it gets it anyway. It receives that data and puts it into the mix, and then it comes up with a different, and then it's optimizing in a different way. And you can't then, and notice the other words that Deirdre said many minutes ago, not repeatable, not predictable, not explain itself, imprecise. And what it's doing is giving you predictions. Well, it's giving you predictions when it's learned about something you didn't intend it to learn about. And that's the scary part of all of these algorithms, right? And now you are picking up because it when it's used as a weapon, it is very concerning, especially if it picked up incorrect information that you didn't want it to, because it then starts to aim itself at you by mistake, right? That's where this thing, when you carry out the thought process, and those of us that have spent years studying this technology, that gets, by the way, and I don't mean to become really obtuse, but it gets really confusing when you move into quantum computing, where there is no set of rules, that there is yes, no, and maybe, right? So that you get into a whole different world when you're using algorithms written for that. Fortunately, we don't have a lot so far, but it's there and we can use it. So that's how this can turn into something that you could envision. Now, Deirdre spent enough time over this target to be able to envision that. But unless you know, you can deconstruct to say, wait a minute, these are learning algorithms. Those environments, there's a lot of information coming at you that may or may not have relevance. And by the way, if you mix it in with the relevant data, it could give you something that it optimizes to you don't want it to. But it's getting it anyway because of the quote fog of war, because you can't separate out the good from the bad, but it needs the data to learn and adapt to the environment it's in. This is why we say those who are using this technology today, because it's heavily constrained, stuck in a Microsoft database, and is it a learning algorithm? You bet it is. But they've taken and put so many heavy, and the term in the industry is called guardrails, which you and I might translate into rules, right? They put such heavy rules around it, it's going to give a more predictive answer. It's going to make sure that you have some level of reconciliation in it. That's using an algorithm, but constraining it down to the point where it's giving you a more predictability in a world where you want predictability, because most of our world today requires precision, reconciliation, and rules to operate. Think accounting, right? Anything that needs to be counted. So this is where this environment that I just described, and the outcome of that is where this gets scary for those of us who think about this. And to make matters worse, could we find ways around this? Yes. Could we convince our allies to perhaps adopt them? Yes. Can we convince those who have motivations that are different than us to adopt them? No. And that's where it gets very scary. So could we put together a world order that says we should adopt certain rules? You can. we've done that with certain other serious technologies, and a lot of people have lined up on the climate space. A lot of people have lined up on chemical weapons. A lot of people have lined up on a lot of different things where many, many countries in the world have agreed to operate in a certain way. But then there are those that won't operate that way. And many times those tend to be countries, and I shouldn't say countries, they tend to be social gatherings or geopolitical groups is a better way to say it. Geopolitical groups that won't play by those rules. And that's where the scary part of this is. And especially if it gets into private sector hands, like you said, Deirdre, where they're not controlled in their release. Now, you know, we had a very controlled, and so did many countries in the world, a very controlled spreading of advanced technology that was held very controllable, and usually it was held controllable at their defense level. We had that in the United States, then we released it to the commercial side. And that happened during one of the presidential administrations that believed these kinds of technologies were better served if they were in the commercial hands, not in the government hands. And there's a big debate about that. And we all know it's the people have different words for it. And Eisenhower was the one that warned us of this. So is there a deep state, and is there a deep state in government? Is there a deep state in national security? Who knows? But Eisenhower believed that there was in the government world, and I'm just telling you what he thought. I'm not telling you what we think. That's just history. So there's a lot of arguments about these subjects, and this is what you get a window into in this book and in this section on security and world order. That those, I think about this because I'm involved in it and have been since I got out of college, since I graduated from college. I did manage to do that, Deirdre. I know that's hard to believe. But I've been involved in having to think about this. And my first default, and I know, Deirdre, you think this way too, because you and I talk about this, our default is almost always, okay, what does this mean to us globally? Right? That's where we start. And then it comes back later into what does this mean to us as a country and as a people? But we know that ultimately it's the world that influences what we end up experiencing longer term. That's why certain cultures in the world have to set examples for others to follow. So again, Deirdre, I'm hogging your time here, but this is just an indication of those of us, and you could look at this. That's why the Army War College got it, Air University got it. I'm sure West Point's got it. Everybody, Naval Academy. I got to be careful. I should have said Naval Academy first. Sorry, Deirdre. I'm apologizing to you. I should be apologizing to my friends and colleagues. But we're all looking at this for different reasons. Let me also tell you that, and I think you know this, and notice how Deirdre said, these are learning algorithms that rely on data. The area that has the most data that we collect, and Deirdre, I know this is not a trick question for you, is one industry. Do you recall the industry that collects more data and has more data in their holding? Look straight up through your roof. Space. We collect and have collected more data about space than any other particular thing. Defense has an awful lot of data, and a lot of it has to do with space these days because we now have made our world, instead of being two-dimensional, it's now three-dimensional. And one of the reasons why we're seeing the drone and AI technology being applied there, and we're seeing it being applied to aviation, is because Elon Musk has been working on self-driving cars, and MIT and other just outstanding technology areas have been helping him with those algorithms, taking in data and predicting the right answers. And that is now going not just in the two-dimensional world, but in the three-dimensional world. Now you multiply the complexities in the options dramatically when you go into three dimensions. But because we have so much data about these dimensions, because of the work in space, there's data available. And from the work that's being done on self-driving cars, or self-driving vehicles is a better way to say it. So there is an enormous amount there are an enormous amount of interesting concepts here, and things that are difficult to get your hands around. This is why, one of the reasons why we started Deep Business is because these things are not easy to get your hands on, and not easy to get your head around. And you don't have necessarily the time to spend on this with the depth that we do. And our job, and I'm certainly not, Deirdre's doing a much better job of this than I am. I really have to narrow my thinking down, because I've got too many things in this subject crossing through my mind. And one of the things we try to pride ourselves in is boiling these things down to their essence. And you can tell I've got a long way to go. It's one of the reasons why I have yet to write the second edition of Leading in the Digital Age. It's just because I can't seem to get my head around, how do I now start to make sense of this in a longer frame and be able to explain it in a simpler way. So again, Deirdre, there's my third 20 or 30-minute segment here, and I apologize in advance, but this book, and I can't thank you enough for doing the Nonsense or Not, because it causes me to go back and reread things I've read before. This was a new book to me. I did not read it when it came out. I dismissed it because of the authors. I saw somebody that I didn't really care to read about, at MIT, who is computing focused, and I'm focused on the next level of computing. I'm not focused on rule-based computing. And that very unfair on my part, and I should be chastised for thinking that way. And the same thing with Eric Schmidt. He's no longer involved in it. So I just kind of dismissed it. And then I dismissed because Henry Kissinger was involved. I thought they just put the name in there to sell the book. And so I just dismissed it when it came out and didn't even bother. And then I have thank goodness, my friend and colleague Deirdre, who said, have you read this book yet? You need to read this book, when you were doing your survey of the literature. And thank goodness she did. And so we hope we will be encouraging you to spend the time on this, so that you can at least begin to think about how this might apply to what you're doing, and how this might apply to how you think about the world and see the world going forward. So I will stop there. I've said everything I need to say from my side, Deirdre, so I will leave the rest to you.
Okay. Well, you did cover some of the points I was going to make about geopolitical factors, which is good. I will just have one concluding sentence. This is from the authors. Governments must assess and attempt to explore how the addition of AI logic to human experience of battle can render war more humane and precise, and reflect on impact or diplomacy and world order. I wrote in the margin of the book, as if,
Right. Yes, exactly.
But I think what the authors are doing is talking a little idealistically here. There are an awful lot of players here. And as you were saying, Tom, there are a lot of different motivations here. So, and what's worrisome, I think, to both of us is that the people who we think should be thinking about these sorts of things are not thinking about these sorts of things yet. But anyway, let's move on to our third area very quickly now, human identity. And the authors treated this a bit differently, and I think maybe a bit less effectively, because it didn't have the impact, because we've already been starting to think about these things as a society, but the authors are saying, yeah, maybe we've started to think about these things, but we're not taking them as seriously as we should. And they're dealing with, and this is a very brief summary. I know that we've been talking for a long time about this book, Tom, so I want to start to summarize a little more. That the authors are saying, wait a second, we should think a little more about how we as humans are going to have to change our self-perception and our role in the world, because these things are taking over some of the things we're doing, some of our thinking, some of our actions, how we define our role, our aspirations, our fulfillment to change. And they use the word agency. Humans think of themselves as agents in the world, as causing things to happen. And if it turns out that commercially and from a government point of view and so forth, AIs are taking over the roles as agents. The AIs are the ones making things happen. How does that change our view here? Now, I think the movie industry will say, well, the humans are going to roll up their sleeves and get back at the AIs, maybe. But we have to be aware of where they're taking over parts of our lives here. And, like, do we still have a choice in how AIs are actually starting to control our lives in some ways? And if you read the newspapers very carefully, listen to the news carefully, you'll start to see that we may not have the agency we thought we had. For example, there's a lot of conversation right now about how insurance decisions, particularly health insurance decisions, are being driven by AI as opposed to our reality. That perhaps one of the reasons why our insurance costs are being driven up so much, and everyone is aware of how insurance costs are being driven up, are because of some of the decisions AIs are using in various scenarios. And this is something that should give all of us pause here. But the author's point here is that everyone, time to wake up and become aware of how eyes are changing our human identity. And you business leaders, time to become aware of how AIs are similarly taking over some parts of what businesses see as their agency, or how decisions in the business ecosystem are now possibly being made by AIs without our being aware of this, and how this is affecting the ways that we then can act in the marketplace, the business world, our own lives, and so forth. So to that end, this book is a wake-up call for humans to simply become aware of what's going on here, and that we need, and now I'm quoting from the authors here, individuals and societies will have to make up their minds which aspects of life to reserve for human intelligence and which to turn over to AI or AI-human collaborations. I don't even like how that sentence reads. I want to think that humans still have full agencies in their lives, and it disturbs me that others are allowing parts of their lives to be taken over by the AIs. And a final comment that I'm reading from what the author said, that there's the need for an ethic that comprehends and even guides the AI age. Well, it's paramount, the need for this ethic, but it cannot be entrusted to one discipline or field. All should take part in an exchange of views not shaped by preoccupation. This is saying, hey, humans, we can't leave this to the tech companies, can't leave this to government, we can't leave this to any interests out there. All of us need to be participating in the discussion about how AI is going to be used in relation to our lives and also our human future. Now, Tom, earlier you started to talk about our 3 leadership questions. And I'm not going to go into the discussion. I think you handled this question already. Leadership question 1, that any leader out there is supposed to be or should be asking, am I missing something? Clearly, the authors are screaming as loudly as they can that leaders and all humans are missing something here and need to be doing more thinking, more paying attention, and more participation in the discussion. Same with question 2, what are the motivations behind this? And the authors are screaming again as loudly as they can that no, the motivations are not pure. They're not aligned with human interests. They're not aligned with business interests, and that everyone needs to be paying a lot more attention to what's going on in this sphere so that we can drive the use of AI in a way that is productive for humans and not simply done by talking about this the way the authors would, tech companies aiming at a profit motive here. So everyone needs to pay a lot more attention here. And so what do leaders do? Well, all leaders, and I answered this on this slide in terms of leaders, but think all humans here should begin to assess how and where the use of an AI tool would make sense, need to learn more about the emerging technologies and develop use cases, which really don't exist now in the world. And some of the discussion we've had in our AI workshops talked about this, that there are no really good use cases out there for some of these forms of AI, and that leaders must assess how the use of an AI tool in one department would affect the organization as a whole and its whole business ecosystem. Any use of an AI tool must be guided by strategy. The authors tend to be polite, but they're really screaming. And I think you and I, Tom, are also starting to say, look, people, we as business people, leaders, people making decisions, people exercising judgment, need to be paying a lot more attention, doing a lot more deep thinking that is being done. So I'm going to circle around to our 3 final questions. No, this is not nonsense. Everyone needs to be paying attention. And as both you and I have been saying, Tom, everyone needs to read this book. So
you're wondering what I'm doing here. I'm petting a very upset Ridgeback. She doesn't like this subject. She's gotten very concerned, Deirdre, listening to us for an hour and a half now on this. And I understand why she's so agitated. I really do.
This is a massive 100-pound Rhodesian Ridgeback. And a very sensible one.
Yes, a very sensible one, intelligent.
And I think the whole idea, clearly senses that you're agitated about this, I'm agitated about this, and we think that everyone, again, should be doing the reading, the research, come attend our workshops, talk with us about this, and just become more and more aware of the issues involved in a massive area. And with that, Tom, I think.
Right, so I gotta say a few things. I'm sorry, Deirdre. So just if you think that all Deirdre and I do is talk about where the rubber meets the universe, which is what you'd get if you think I've just spent an hour and a half and these folks are in La La Land thinking about all the future issues of AI. Go watch video 17 on our channel. Video 17 is Schmidt. He works with AI algorithms all day long, and he explained to us how he sees them in his everyday work today. And it's fascinating. And he has his own view. He's very sophisticated in this subject. He's a technologist. He's chief digital officer of a tech startup. He studied with Deirdre and me when he was a professional at those days still. He's since then become a friend and colleague. He not only has done video 17, he also is going to be soon doing a deconstructing a use case, an AI use case for us, starting with what does it do? How did he get there? What kind of algorithms does he have and so forth? So he's going to continue to do a series of these things, just taking apart how is AI used today in industry by large customers. So beyond the things we know about image recognition, language, and all these sorts of things. So I would just leave you with one final thought, and it's about the Turing test. So the Turing test, and this is Deirdre's, you can see she's smiling there because she's the one that began this whole subject about the Turing test, saying, are we headed in the wrong direction there? Because Turing was trying to say, look, we ought to, where it really becomes concerning is when the whatever this stuff does, when it starts to be indistinguishable from something a human would do, that's when it has reached the point of being close to human intelligence. And Deirdre's point is, why do we even measure it against human intelligence? It doesn't have to have human intelligence to do a lot of really stuff we don't want it to do, because it's learning based, not rule based. And so that is really the issue, is that, yes, it's interesting to hear people saying, oh, it's going to become human-like and it's going to take over the world. It could take over the world almost where it is now without even being close to AGI or anything close. So it's, and AGI stands for artificial general intelligence, general meaning that it's broad enough to act like a human being would act in every situation that a human being faces, and it would be at least as good or not better than a human being. That's a tough thing, but regardless, there are plenty of people that can make the argument that exists or is close today. You've got Kurzweil saying we're there. You've got others saying, I don't think it's going to be a few years still. Look, folks, it doesn't matter. That's the problem that Deirdre's got. And by the way, I agree with her. It does not matter, because the algorithms as they're written today could be fed enough data that has the wrong data in it, and it would be optimizing towards solutions we do not want and could do a lot of damage today that has nothing to do with acting like a human being. So I believe Deirdre's right in that it's interesting to talk about, and it's fun to have in the popular press, and it's fun to have movies that talk about that. But the real issue is that it can learn from anything, and it's indiscriminate in how it learns. It's just more of what you feed it. And we have a set of a phrase that we've used for years now. I think it showed up in a book I wrote even, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 years ago, called SEB, SEB, like Sebastian. Safety, explainability, and bias. Those are the key things about learning algorithms. And if you remember anything as you think through the 3 questions. What are we missing? How are the motivations aligned? And then what could we do today, or should we do today? And then SEB, safety, explainability, and bias, because those are the 3 key questions we believe around AI and AI algorithms, and that we are talking about as learning, unconstrained learning algorithms that learn from data. So with that, Deirdre, that 5-minute summary that put us over an hour and a half, I will turn it back over to you, because this is your time, and I'm not sure you won the time battle this time, although I think you may have just barely.
I will simply mention that our next AI workshop is on Wednesday, August 14th, and that anyone who wants to attend would be welcome. Simply go to our sites and you'll get more information on how to register. And with that, Tom, I think it's a wrap.